Part of the influence on my own thinking, as I look back on my life, I'm 75 years old now. I was born December 2nd, 1942 in Roxbury, section in Boston, a housing project. It's about 30 miles north of where my Native American mother came from, which is the Blue Hills in Massachusetts, known to those Algonquian-speaking people as the Massachusetts, which means the place. Massa means big, and Chusaug means hills. So they were the people with the big hill place. The English ripped off the name, of course, and took them out along with the land. So, but those people did survive. They were very resilient. But one of the connections I have that has helped me over the years concerning the idea of work being so important, or what I would call shared practical action, is part of the story. I'll do this very briefly, about the creation of the Great League of Peace among the Haudenosaunee, or the Iroquois. They were originally, their history says, 5 nations at war, the Oneida, the Mohawks, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, the Seneca. A peacemaker appeared. He went to the house of a woman who had been a neutral, who had given food to the warriors who passed between east and west on their way, and west to east, on the way to fight each other. And she asked what message he brings, and he says, I bring the message of the Master of Life that all people should love each other and live together in peace. But her response, according to their own history, is a very interesting one, very good one. She says, your words are good, but what form will your words take when they come to work in the world?
Yep.
And that's really the crux of it. Good words, okay, but it has to be shared work to make it happen.
Right.
And that's had a lot of influence on me and my thinking over the years. But I'm also a ripple. A ripple from my ancestral, paternal ancestors in red clay country of Alabama, and of my Native American ancestors in Massachusetts. So I'm trying to follow in their footsteps. I actually have been. I just didn't know I was doing it. Now I know.
Wow. So was it? I think it was 2 weeks ago. When you joined on the show, and we played a Stokely Carmichael speech in Oakland, and he was talking about the importance of learning about your roots and learning about the histories and the patterns of history so that they don't be repeated. So I guess for the folks out there who are maybe exploring their identity, like, do you have any advice for them, or can you tell them like why it's so important?
Well, I can speak about myself, which may or may not have relevance to anyone else. There's an Algonquian, that's the language family that my indigenous ancestors spoke. Excuse me. And there's a word in Algonquian, Naiwichewanik, which means the place between two strong currents. So basically an island. But a lot of indigenous words have a lot of depth to them. They're like poetry with multiple meanings. And I thought about that image, not just a single word island, but the idea of the place between two strong currents. One of my genealogical, historical currents that I come from is Africa, by way of the infamous slave trade. And the other current is Native America, by way of my mother's ancestors in New England. I am between those two currents, so I see myself as like a Nwichewanik. In that sense, the place between is complete. It is its own self, but it only exists because of the currents, by definition.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I don't consider myself, this is just about me, I'm not saying anyone else has to do this. I don't consider myself a hybrid or a half-breed or whatever. I'm not half of it, I'm a complete man. And I am that place, that which you wanted, but I only exist because of the ancestral currents of Africa and Native America. That's what works for me. So I don't want to push that on anyone else, but that's the most meaningful way I have of thinking about myself.
I really appreciate that you take the just personal stance from your own perspective, because a lot of times people like to instruct others on how to engage with their past or how they should honor their roots and everything. And I just wrote down that term, the place between two currents, because I am also someone from different genealogical backgrounds, where my mom was white and my dad was black. Mom West Coast, dad East Coast, and being in between those two cultures, especially because I was raised by a single mom here in Santa Cruz, and it was just the norm to be the only black person, the only dark-skinned person in a classroom or in a social setting or anything like that. And then when I would go around black people on the East Coast, I was lighter skinned than them, but they still accepted me even though I spoke differently and all this other kind of stuff. And it's always been a really interesting balancing act for me personally to have that identity and know where I am or who I am or where I'm coming from, especially because I had really limited contact to the African American side of my family. So I think that's another one of the reasons why the trip to Selma had such a lasting impact on me, because it really got me back down to understanding the quote unquote freedoms that I experience today, whether or not they are actually what they're meant to be or not. But either way, the more mobility that I experience today because of the work that was done by my ancestors in the past, during the civil rights movement, during the abolition movement, during all of those pivotal moments where half of my genealogy was fighting to be represented as a human, first of all, while the other half of my genealogy was actively working against that realization. And I really think it's important, just to kind of follow in line with you, for me, what's worked really well for me is to dig back into understanding history more. And the more that I've learned about history and the implications that it holds and the lessons that we can learn from it, the more I understand how we have gotten to the point where we are today in society, where there has been such a severe lack of emphasis on history and a defunding of education systems, and not having, especially in the area in Santa Cruz, not having a very diverse representation in the teaching structure to be able to offer those alternative views of history that are not necessarily in the cookie cutter textbooks that are sent out into public school systems. So really important from where I'm coming from to understand the past so that we can not deal with the things in the future, and having conversations about things. When you run into people that don't understand the past and you try to have these critical conversations with them about the reality that we live in, I personally experience, I'm oftentimes met with resistance, anger, distrust, because they don't understand the correlation. And there's a great quote from Dr. King, and there's nothing in this world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity, right? And so it's like, if these lessons are there for us to learn and they're open to us, but we're choosing not to look at them and just kind of moving forward with these ideas of what we consider to be normal, it's dangerous. And so it's important for us to know history in our pasts.
Yeah. This actually got this little bracelet from Selma, and it says "Looking back to move forward," and it's
that's great.
Also the African proverb of Sankofa, and yeah, it's like we have to know where we come from to know where we're going, where our people are going. And that was something that was really powerful for me too when I went to Selma, was just, uncovering that history and just learning about the deep, deep history that's in the South and that's in Selma specifically, because it just opened my eyes to so much more, because I had those cookie cutter textbooks and I learned civil rights, voting rights, and but I didn't fully grasp it until I went there. Yeah.
By the way, I brought something, a little memento. I did a little bit of work with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1965 in Montgomery. I was a friend of SNCC. I wasn't. My buddy Hardy Fry was a full member of SNCC, but I was an ally, auxiliary. And I did just a little bit here and there in Montgomery, but here's "We Shall Overcome" button from
an original pin from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that says "We Shall Overcome" on it. Here, check that out. Oh my, that is amazing.
I gotta show this to the camera.
Yeah.
Wow.
For those of you that can't see what we're talking about, it's a 2¼ inch button that is vintage to say the least, and has the words Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee around the outer ring,
I got it.
and in big bold black letters in the middle over white, it says "We shall overcome." That's a powerful piece of history, my friend.
Yeah, I am grateful that I took part in it for just a bit, and I'm grateful to the ones who really were in it in a very deep way, and made things happen that we thought were impossible. I mean, even I remember thinking at the time, people were saying it was going to take 1,000 years to change anything, and in some ways it was hard to picture that they were wrong. We were fighting for a just society, but it seems like that whole totalitarian system of the courts, the police, the legislatures, the public, the white public being against you is kind of mitigated against being positive. But there was but it taught me a lesson. Don't be cynical. Don't be pessimistic because you think you know the future. I did not know the future, and the future in the sense of what was accomplished by the ending of legal segregation. The signs in the window obviously leaves a lot to be done, and King understood. Martin Luther King understood that, of course. But even those changes, which were resisted with dire force, bombs, assassinations, to make sure people didn't have access to education or walking into a public restaurant. Those changes that actually did occur after and as a result of the civil rights activity, where it was hard to picture those in the midst of being in a segregated society that you were fighting against. So now I know we're living in volatile times, and times that people think are they are very negative in many ways, but from those experiences, I have learned, as I said, not to be pessimistic, because pessimism requires a certain sense that I know what the future is going to be.